All right. I don't know what you're looking at. Well, I'm going to share a lot about my farm, VersaLand, which is 145 acres in Iowa City, Iowa. I want to follow through some of the things that I've done there that are different or uncommon, and then I'm going to try and share grant programs or resources along the way about how I accomplished individual things and things that you can do for, I don't know, researching and innovating on your own site. So I'll get started.
So today I'm going to talk about modern agroforestry and stuff that I've done at VersaLand, which is 145 acres in Iowa City, Iowa. I started this site with very limited means, just a little bit of savings, and borrowed some money and really leveraged the government programs that were out there. And I'll talk about how I did each individual element today and things you might be able to do to research and find resources and potentially even get some cost share from Uncle Sam. So this slide really exemplifies my site. It's a lot of fruit and nut trees, a lot of overall ecology as far as food production and handling nature and financial returns as well. If you ever want to get in touch with me at all for anything I'm talking about today, just versaland.com/contact is probably the easiest way to get in touch. At some point in my life, I was a real estate broker, and I lived in a really big house, and I had a big yard I had to mow all the time, and I had a tiny garden. And I realized that I was spending a disproportionate amount of time on the upkeep of life and not the enjoyment of life. And once I had that realization, I put a plan in place to get back on the land, develop systems that I thought met my needs and met the needs of wilderness and ecology. And I was looking at indigenous ecosystems and Native American history, and I was like, well, look, all these human needs were met outside of needing massive tillage and massive infrastructure to provide food. And I really got into permaculture. I got into rewilding, went down the whole wormhole, and I am where I am right now. But what I'm trying to do is build a human habitat, and that for me in the Midwest means an edible savanna. And I want to mimic the natural ecosystem and put it into a food system. So this image was designed by Amy Kester. It's a phenomenal job of showing the different layers of woody perennial polyculture of an edible savanna. So my site really exemplifies this in a scaled fractal way. When you're implementing silvopasture, you can do it with one of two primary yields that you're focusing on. One would be human needs, really focusing on direct out of hand consumption. So fruit direct to human consumption, asparagus direct to human consumption, not running through either a processing pathway or a forage or fodder pathway, like going through livestock. So this is intensive agriculture, a lot of energy inputs and a lot of energy outputs, right? Now, another way of doing that would be silvopasture with a livestock focus, so more extensive. So minimal management, you're just moving livestock from place to place, but the yields are perhaps not quite as high per acre. And that's fine too. A very low-level implementation of silvopasture is just trees and livestock. Here we're seeing a pulpwood plantation in the southeast U.S. and just raising stockers with pulpwood harvested every 20, 30, 40 years. My site is much more intensive than that, much more. And it's a Keyline Silvopasture system. So every light blue line that you're seeing here is a row of trees. The yellow areas are modeled earthworks. And the little blue things you're seeing are little like drive-through ponds and pocket ponds. And again, the intent of my site was to support an entire ecology, both livestock, human needs, wildlife, ecological needs. And there are many facets of agroforestry. I'll talk about those definitions and how government programs fall into that. The idea of plowing over dozing every fence row and tillage fence row to fence row and big fields, it really reduces the amount of edge in a field. And I want to really focus on that ecosystem edge and that habitat. And edible hedgerows and orchards and alley cropping, silvopasture are all different definitions or different practices inside of agroforestry. Can everyone still hear me?
Yeah, we can all see you and hear you. You did lock up there for just a minute in the beginning of the last slide, where audio went out for a minute.
So I'm going to go through a bunch of different resources that I really have leaned on a lot that have helped me figure out my systems and explain them in financial terms when talking to lenders. The first one is the USDA Agroforestry Center. Many people have had negative experiences with bureaucracy or with government, but of all my actions or experiences with government, the National Agroforestry Center has been one of the best. They're very well run. They have a lot of resources. They've got a lot of caring people there that actually know what they're talking about. And they do a great job of integrating outreach with just everything. I mean, via illustrations, via financial modeling tools, via documentation, and providing it all free of charge, by the way. So nac.unl.edu, that stands for National Agroforestry Center, based at University of Nebraska, Lincoln. Great resource. So if you haven't seen that already, go check that out. Another thing you can get for free, both in PDF form online and also a printed softcover copy, spiral bound, is an excellent resource, is the Handbook for Agroforestry Planning and Design. This is a pretty thick volume. You can get it at the URL below, but you can also request a similar handbook from the Center for Agroforestry. You do have to tell them that you're a practitioner, because you are, and use that resource wisely. I mean, our tax dollars are paying for all this publishing, so only get a hard copy if you really need to, but do not be afraid to go request one online. Another really great series that the Center for Agroforestry puts out, or the National Agroforestry Center puts out, is the Working Trees series. So you'll see those images in the bottom left and the bottom right, working trees for wildlife, working trees for pollinator. They're a series of full color PDF handouts. Again, you can get them as a PDF form or a printed handout that talks about these practices at work with illustrations. Great job explaining things. And I've used these a lot as a tool to kind of convey what I want to do in an agroforestry sense or a permaculture sense on the ground, with working with people that might not have prior exposure to it, or people in a USDA office locally that have no idea what I'm talking about when I say silvopasture. Rather than me try and explain it and hand them a Sepp Holzer book, I can print off a document from their own organization, from USDA, and say, this is what I'm talking about. It's established, it's known. Here's the practices at work. Here's where you can go to learn more about this. And that helps kind of connect the gap of knowledge and practice between myself and an otherwise bureaucrat I might be having to work with. So great resource. Again, all available in PDF online, and you can request printed copies if you like. And you can request multiple printed copies if you'd like to hand them out to your friends or neighbors as well. Another thing too is that the need for financial modeling agroforestry is intense. I don't come from money. I didn't inherit a farm. I have to borrow every dime to operate. And being able to convey agroforestry, which is not widely known amongst corn and soybean bankers in the Midwest, you need to show financial models to do that. And the idea of an enterprise budget gets you halfway there. But all these extra practices, conservation practices, multi-enterprises integrated together, you've got to be able to model it financially, ideally, in an Excel document. And the National Agroforestry Center, which is one entity at UNL, and the Center for Agroforestry, which is based at University of Missouri in Columbia, Mizzou, are two separate entities that both do a really great job of providing financial modeling tools for agroforestry. So check out both these links. If you want to see an economic model of establishing windbreak, how that'll impact your energy bills, what kind of yields you might see from that over time in either forest products, non-timber forest products, like mushrooms grown on logs instead of lumber, or edible forest products, meaning, hey, I planted an apple tree and it's both windbreak and a fruit yield with economic potential. So these tools are great for that. Do check out both of those. Another resource is the URL below. So Missouri itself, University of Missouri, has a pretty great extension department. And if you click on horticulture in there, they have an extensive list of financial modeling tools as well. Another thing I use a lot is leveraging academic research. Farmers are too busy actually farming to really do a lot of research. And in the day, historically, a lot of research was actually farmer-led. So there was kind of informal organizations of farmers getting together, doing their own research and sharing that information. And you don't see that too often today. But the Center for Agroforestry, again at Mizzou, does a great job of working with working farmers to produce academic research, which is then shared. Yeah, the links are at the bottom. I think we can get them in the show notes at the end or something like that. So don't worry about writing them all down. And here's an example of that academic research. And this is why I really love agroforestry. And this is super important to me, is that wherever you fall politically, wherever you fall on the issue of climate change, think it exists, think it doesn't, it really doesn't matter, because agroforestry fundamentally, the practices at play are benefiting soil life and soil health, and they're increasing soil organic matter. And if you are a believer in climate change, an increase in soil organic matter is a decrease in atmospheric carbon, right? So that's good in your opinion. If you don't believe in climate change whatsoever, but you still are really economically minded and you like profit and financial capital, increases in soil organic matter are fundamentally increasing agronomic yields. So no matter where you fall on a lot of these divisive issues, agroforestry is a big uniter. And that's why I'm a big proponent of it. And this is why even academic research backs that up and benefits it. Another thing that I run into quite often, so I plant a lot of windbreaks and buffers along the perimeters of my field, so they're right up against a neighbor's property line. A common complaint amongst old timers is that impacts crop yields. If I plant a windbreak of black locusts 10 feet from my property perimeter, which I have full legal right to do, my neighbors will complain that impacts their crop yields for soybeans or corn or something. And actually it does for the little tiny band right next to that property border, but it actually improves it overall up to 13 times the height of that windbreak. So if I have a mature windbreak that's 50 feet tall, they're seeing actual net benefits into that field, meaning their overall yields are higher on the whole for 13 times the height of that windbreak. So if it's a 10-foot tall windbreak, they're seeing overall higher yields for 130 feet inside. 100-foot tall, it's 1,300 feet. So 40-acre block is 1,320 lineal feet per side. So even a 50-foot tall windbreak on the entire perimeter is covering that entire 40-acre block. So it's a net higher yield for the whole field. So it's really important to be able to convey that. And academic research, which you can go find online and print off and hand to your neighbor, actually backs that up, which is great to have an impartial third party benefiting your management decisions. Another thing I've worked with is SARE, SARE.org, S-A-R-E. They do a great job of what's called farmer rancher grants. So they actually offer grant money to pay farmers and ranchers, those actually working on the land, to do research projects that benefit themselves and their neighbors for the management practices that they're using. I did a SARE grant for developing a root washer that uses no welding to build. So I started off, getting more into vegetables before I really dove into agroforestry. This is a decade ago now. But what I found was that there's a lot of people that are really interested in small scale farming and market gardening, But most of the folks that I met that were doing that were coming at it from an academic introduction. So they're English majors at university, and they come out with a passion for food production and food justice, and they want to start a CSA, but they never had the mechanical skills. They didn't have the background in welding and construction and all the things we take for granted as most farmers do. So there's a major skill gap there. And I saw a lot of inefficient operations that could get more efficient if they had the right tools, but they couldn't afford the tools because of capital constraints. And they didn't have the skill set to build them themselves because they don't know how to weld. What can we do to fill that gap? So I wrote a SARE grant and said, hey, I want to develop a root washer design that uses no welding to build, that will provide production efficiencies for farmers. And then we're going to open source the plans to build that. So we did that. And this project was created. We did it with farmhack.org, and then we open sourced the plans. So if you go to farmhack.org/tools, you can find CAD plans and directions for not only this tool, but many, 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 many others. So it's a great example of the work that I like to do where, hey, I've got a problem. I don't have a lot of money. How am I going to solve that? Do this, reach out to a grant program, and then share my results with everybody. So it's a net benefit to all. Rising tide raises all ships. And of course, if you haven't heard about farmhack.org, go there and check it out. You get plans for all sorts of DIY farm tools and inventions that will improve your efficiency and profitability. Now, skipping around other topics. So I'm an agroforester, permaculturalist. I've got fruit crops, nut crops, livestock. Outside of intensive energy inputs, I want to spend as little money possible. I want to burn as little diesel fuel possible. I want to emit as little carbon as possible. I need to plan for nature providing for year-round forage. So I want to have nature giving me food to the longest extent possible. And I'm in a cold climate, zone 5B, temperate climate. It's about -30 degrees Fahrenheit in the wintertime. How do I have fruit yields year-round? Well, I've got a plan for that. And that's, persimmons. This is a winter hanging persimmon, through the entire winter. High caloric density, nutrient dense, high vitamin C forage. Sunchokes, Jerusalem artichoke, Helianthus tuberosus is a self-storing feedstock. Again, a high carbohydrate feed source, refrigerating itself in the soil profile, through the winter. And what I think is really important for you, if you want to be an agroforester, is to develop a localized harvest schedule. So you need to do a really good job of documenting what species are fruiting when, and how you can extend that season. So sometimes through multiple varieties of the same species, you can get a 3 or 4 month harvest season by staggering out those varieties. And a great example is this: Dave Wilson Nursery publishes a poster showing fruit and nut harvest dates. Now, clearly this is biased towards Southern California, and that's going to be, it'll vary from your area in the world in all likelihood. So you need to establish that for your own local area, but getting something like this is a great baseline data to know how that might shift one way or the other. A Honeycrisp apple might be ripe October 1st in my area, and 2 or 3 weeks earlier or later, depending on where you are in the country, right? But the thing is that all those different varieties, Honeycrisp is to Hudson's Golden Gem, basically the same ratio, depending on where you're at in the country. It's going to be X number of weeks apart. That's kind of a constant. So good to start establishing that data, and go ahead and build a spreadsheet for your own area. The crops that grow there, the season that you're seeing harvesting ability, and start working on that and establishing that, because you're going to be able to design your systems based upon that data, and that data has got to be right for your area. Another thing that I've used a lot is the EQIP program with USDA, which is the Environmental Quality Incentives Program. It's a very well-funded program. And again, I can criticize agricultural subsidies for commodity crops all day long, but me as a person is not going to change that, right? It's not going to go away anytime soon. But oddly enough, the conservation practices are also federally funded because they're effectively funding the other side, ecological destruction on the same tone. But those programs are funded and they're accessible. They're widely accessible. They're not incredibly competitive. just about anyone can access the EQIP program, and I have. So whether you believe in these programs or not, whether you think that they're stealing your taxes, then that's effectively your moral obligation to recoup them back, right? To take those taxes and reapply them to ecological regeneration. And if you think that socialism is great and everyone should pay 95% taxes, then it's also your moral obligation to use those funds for the best good that you can. And that's, in my opinion, ecological restoration. So I really recommend that anyone, regardless of their political stripe, looks at the EQIP program. Some examples about that is that step one in accessing any EQIP cost share, meaning any funding, is you have to establish a conservation activity plan, otherwise known as a CAP. It's often referred to as a CAP plan, even though the P already stands for plan. So just get used to saying it that way. But on the screen here, I'm showing you the payment rates for a CAP plan. So what this is the federal government, the USDA, is paying you, landowner or land operator, to develop a conservation activity plan. And that means you have to pay what is known as a TSP, technical service provider. So this is a private citizen who's not a government employee who contracts out the development of these conservation activity plans. So they help you put together a plan that fits your needs and goals, which you can then present back to your NRCS rep, your National Resource Conservation Service rep, in order that you can access more EQIP funds to do more stuff, right? So this is step one. So step one is you have to apply, meaning make an EQIP application for a conservation activity plan. Now what's cool about this is that you can justify paying someone like myself or someone else who's a TSP $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 to help you write a plan and work on a preliminary design for your site. So if you're a permaculturalist and you want to have a permaculture design plan done, you're effectively getting government to pay for a design, and you're paying someone a proper professional hourly wage to do that. It's no money out of your pocket, right? Which is pretty cool. Now, another cool thing about getting a CAP plan is that any EQIP application requires you to make the application, and then it's weighted on a point basis whether you're awarded funds or not. But if you apply for that conservation activity plan, which is step one, you automatically max out the available points. So you go to the absolute top of the list. So on a ranking tool, you'll see on the top here, number one is the program application to support the development of a conservation activity plan. If yes, you max out. You get 250 points. You don't have to answer any other questions. You're automatically at the top of the list. Now, that doesn't inherently guarantee that you're going to get funding, because there's only so much funded allocated per year, but in all likelihood, you will get it. So everybody should go out tomorrow, if they haven't already, go to their local NRCS office and say, hey, I would like to apply for a conservation activity plan under EQIP, EQIP. Step one, super easy, costs you nothing. Now, I'm going to talk about a lot of this EQIP stuff now, a lot of the government cost share programs. And I know it's a lot to digest, and I tend to talk quickly because I'm excited about this stuff. And obviously we're on a webinar program and we might have some failures, who knows. But if you ever feel like you're not getting enough help with your local rep, and you're hitting a roadblock doing your own research, please contact me. I do consulting on occasion, but I also charge a professional fee. So I can't answer 1,001 emails for free because I have other work I have to do. But if you ever hit a roadblock, by all means, hire me. But I also don't want to say that as a thing that's required, is that, you know what? I did a lot of research. I did a lot of Googling. I did a lot of figuring it out on my own. And I never enrolled the services of a professional. But in hindsight, it would have been a lot easier just to do that right away for a couple hours. So moving forward, everything else here is free, right? So again, I was trying to create this multifaceted silvopasture system with pollinator habitat and buffer strips and mulched rows of trees on contour and native species and riparian buffer strips. I'm going to walk through some EQIP practices I used to create that whole system. Most recently, in the last year, I put up a 10-foot tall deer fence. And that was a way of excluding deer browse to help me get these tree crops established, because there's a lot of whitetails in my area. A lot of whitetails. I once shot 3 deer in 5 seconds. And if I don't exclude them temporarily, I don't get a chance to get those tree crops established. Now, I was able to leverage 2 things. One, EQIP in my area only wanted to pay for a fence 42 inches tall. So they were willing to cost share for 5 wires of high tensile fence because of the livestock that I graze. So I was then able to more or less screw 10-foot tall posts onto those, 42-inch above ground posts, 7-foot posts, and make a 10-foot tall fence. And I was able to both satisfy my local NRCS rep with, fencing livestock in, and via a very marginal additional cost, I was able to fence all the deer out. Because in my particular case, EQIP didn't want to pay for excluding wildlife, but in some occasions they will. So let's walk through this. So this is practice 382 under EQIP, EQIP. So if you ever want to get a chart of all the practices, just go ahead and Google 2016 EQIP practice list and then your state. So I would Google 2016 EQIP practice list Iowa, or practice list and payment rates Iowa. And then you get a chart, which in Iowa is like 300 or 400 pages long. And you just get to browse and really start to understand the available practice lists. And again, just because it's not in that chart doesn't mean it's necessarily available for you, but it gives you a good idea of what is and what is not. So 382 is fencing. And you look at payment rates on the right there. So the scenario unit is the unit of measure for that practice. So it's by the foot. So they're paying X dollars per foot. EQIP is EQIP, which is like the rate that everybody gets. That's $3.59 per foot. EQIP HU is EQIP historically underserved. So there's different criteria if you're historically underserved. And I believe that takes it to the 80% cost. So if you've been farming 10 years or less, if you've filed a Schedule F for 10 years or less, you are historically underserved. Me, 35-year-old white guy, farming less than 10 years is historically underserved. If you're a woman, you're historically underserved. If you're a minority group, you're historically underserved. So there's specific criteria for that, but the gist of it is that you get paid a higher rate. EQIP initiative is if there's a specific targeted initiative, so like water quality or pollinator habitat. If the practice that you're working with is under that initiative, then you get a higher payment rate. And then on the far right, there's if you're both in an initiative and historically underserved, and that's 90%. So I think memory serves breakdown is 50% of the projected cost is cost share for regular EQIP, 75% for historically underserved, 75% for an initiative, and then 90% if it's both an initiative and historically underserved. So anyway, long story short, you can see what the cost share amounts are and what you might be able to apply to that practice on your site. Again, it's a lot to digest. I'm trying to push it all into a very short period of time, but let's keep moving on and seeing what else we can do in the world. So I established this edible hedgerow and windbreak around the perimeter of my farm. On the far right, you're seeing some black locust seedlings planted at very tight density as a windbreak. Inboard from that, we're seeing goji berry and cherry and apple and pawpaw and redbud. And it's all mulch to help it establish, right? So a lot of this stuff was done with EQIP funding. Back to that National Agroforestry Center, there's handouts for a lot of these practices. So the idea of an edible riparian buffer, that is, hey, planting trees alongside of a riparian zone, alongside of a river to help minimize erosion, eliminate soil runoff, and actually have an edible yield for market. So if you go and get this PDF, edible riparian buffers, you can then take that to your NRCS rep who might not be familiar with it and say, yes, this is the justified practice. I'd like to implement it on my farm under EQIP. Well, here's some examples of implementing that. And there's more than one ways to skin a cat, which is super important. If you direct seed trees alongside of a riparian zone, you can get paid, you know, $400 to $700 an acre to direct seed them. If you're putting in bare root, you're getting, again, you know, $450 to $800 an acre to do that. So you might want to pick and choose your way of implementing it based upon what those payment rates might be. You know, you're going to spend a lot more money for bare root trees, but they're going to have a better chance of establishing themselves than direct seeding. That's a management decision you're going to have to make. You would want to work with your TSP to establish that. Another example is a pollinator buffer. So I planted a 30-foot wide pollinator buffer around 2 sides of the farm. So this is you know, this is black-eyed Susan, Rebecca, Herta pulcherima. You know, a lot of flowering prairie plants and both you know, year-round blossoming plants. So you get pollinator refuge year-round. You're getting bee habitat, and it's also an economic yield in that I have cut flowers at the ready in massive amounts, almost year-round. So a few years ago, this paid $741 an acre to establish this pollinator buffer. Entirely worthwhile. I really recommend it. These payment rates are only getting more and more better funding because of the decline in honeybee populations. So great program to follow. Mulching trees to establish them. So there's money available through EQIP to mulch trees, and it's a significant amount of money. If you want to put down straw on an acreage basis, again, you got to calculate this. You know, hey, you might only have a 4-foot wide mulch strip or a 5-foot wide mulch strip, but it pays $306 per acre to mulch that. Alternatively, you might want to think about it mulching each individual tree. It might be more beneficial for you economically to calculate it that way. You know, $1.75 per tree to mulch each tree. You got to kind of weigh which practice you want to implement, because it might have economic concerns. You might be establishing the same thing, using the same amount of material, but the payment rate might be different depending on how you calculate it. So think about that. I was able to use in situ mulch. So instead of hauling in mulch, I was just cutting alleyway hay and raking it over onto the trees. So that's mulching, right? This is a 3-point rotary rake. This is a Kuhn 300 GM. This is you know, widely available. These are actually made in France, but these are sold in the US. You can get them pretty easily for between $2,500 and about $5,000 brand new. And there is a used market for them. I do like the 3-point ones because they have a little more control laterally. You can get tighter to things versus a trailed model. Again, here's an aerial view. This is a satellite view from space of my farm. You know, lots of alleyway hay, which I can either graze, I can bale it, or I can rake it on as mulch. There's a video online. If you Google farm scale mulching on YouTube, you'll be able to see a video of me doing this, of cutting alleyway hay and raking it on as mulch. I only typically do this like 1 or 2 cuttings a year, so I still have plenty of economic yield. But you know, hey, you need mulch to establish tree crops. I've also picked up a wood chip mulcher, which is typically used for like blueberry production. I don't know if this video is going to play or not, but I'm able to use both carboniferous biomass like wood chips, high carbon, in addition to leguminous hay like alfalfa or clover, you know, more nitrogen rich, which when you mix those two together, you get really great weed suppression, really good mulching, really good water retention, but you also get phenomenal compost that's created. You're building soil right there by mixing that carbon and nitrogen. It's really, really cool. So there we are applying some wood chip mulch. I can apply about 9 cubic yards of wood chip mulch in about 90 seconds, which is pretty amazing. It takes longer to load the spreader up and drive it to where I need it than it does to actually do the mulching. So this saved thousands of hours of handwork. In establishing these trees, I mean, you can go buy a fancy potted pre-grafted tree from a nursery and you pay $30 for it. In the last 3 years, I've planted something like 60,000 plus fruit and nut trees. And the way I was able to afford that is by, grafting my own trees, having my own nursery, planting smaller trees. So if you start with rootstock and you're buying 10,000 of them from some big nursery, you can get them for $1 a piece. If you're getting really fancy grafted chestnut trees from someone like Forest Keyline in Missouri, you're paying $30 a piece for them. Each has their role, but you got to pick what makes sense for you economically and on your timeline, right? I started my own nursery. You might know it, newfarmsupply.com. This is a smaller heirloom apple nursery right in front of my house. So these are just pre-grafted little trees. I'm getting a rootstock in, and I'm grafting on a bench with a little V-grafter to them, planting them out, and 2 years later, I have big trees. So these trees are all now 5, 6, 7 feet tall, and they're worth $15 to $50 a piece, depending on who's wanting them. It's hard to get a lot of the stuff we're talking about. So heirloom cider varieties, you've got to buy them, or you got to graft them yourself because you can't buy them because everybody's always sold out because there's so much demand. I bought a government surplus tree planter and just modified it a little bit. Back to good old NRCS, Natural Resource Conservation Service. Most of those county offices have these tree planters at work. Oh man, I hope we didn't crash. I'm gonna keep going. Hang on, I'll pause here. Can everyone hear me?
Yeah, I think we're all hearing you good.
Okay, cool. So yeah, I bought this just to have it, but you can get them for free or rent them for about $25 a day from most of the local NRCS offices. The problem is that anybody who's actually planting trees, especially bare root, wants to do it on the same day. So if 10 people in your county want to do it on the same day, you've got trees that are sitting out in the sun and only one person can use the tree planter. So in my opinion, it's really worth buying one of these things because it's fully depreciated. That nothing's going to break on them. You can't lose any money on it, but you have it whenever you need to use it, and it's right there. So we buy it, use it until you feel you got your whole site established, and then go ahead and sell it. And I actually just sold mine a few weeks ago, so I don't really need it anymore. I've got everything planned out. Hopefully. So here's an example high up on my site. On the left side, you're seeing, heavy wood chip application. On the right, you're seeing some remnants of some older hay mulch. In the middle of that taller tree is a hybrid chestnut tree. I've got a lot of, chestnuts and apples and persimmons and plums and pears. Anything that's fruit and nut producing on my site, I've got a bunch of them. This should play. So that panning shot shows how those rows of trees are in a keyline pattern. So they're more or less following contour. They're curvilinear. They're wrapping around hillsides versus going straight down them or straight up them. But they're also equidistant. So the row spacing is pretty consistent between them. So I'm able to kind of compromise and accommodate both mechanization, machinery with fixed row widths, hay bines with a 14-foot cut or a tractor, but also making allowance for topography and water flow and soil moisture. So I really am a big proponent of keyline design or modified keyline design, however you want to go about it. As long as you're trying to capture as much water as high in the landscape as possible, that's great in my book. Whether it's subsoiling or using swales, there's a million ways to do it. And there's a lot of different schools of thought on it. And I think, as long as you're trying to keep more water in the soil profile and build soil organic matter, more power to you. You're a great person doing a great job. Now that whole system, designing all this Keyline Silvopasture and these curvilinear rows, I was able to use some pretty cutting edge GPS technology and CAD design to do it. And I'm going to kind of go through that process a little bit so that you might be able to do it. Anymore, I use a UAV drone. So some friends of mine own a UAV service called AeroView Services, and they have both fixed wing drones and hexacopters, you know, multi-rotor drones. And they're really high-end equipment, and it's really expensive stuff. So in the case of getting GPS work done or UAV surveys done, you've got to work with a professional crew. It can't be a little DJI quadcopter. It's just not going to cut. It's not going to cut it. It's not going to be accurate enough for the work that you want to do. Yeah, you can get some cool aerial imagery with a low-dollar drone, but it's just not accurate enough for using precision agriculture, for using GPS stuff. So this is a Trimble UX5. It's like a $60,000 hunk of styrofoam because of all the electronics in it. The way these things work is they take off with like a bungee slingshot, and then they fly back and forth aerial over the property. It's taking many aerial images straight down and then overlaying them to create an orthographic photo. So we're looking at an aerial view of my farm. This is not one image from 40,000 feet. This is many images stitched together from under 500 feet. But if you zoom in on this, the resolution is phenomenal. I mean, absolutely phenomenal. You can see a rabbit on the ground. You can see just amazing detail. On the top right, you're seeing an overwintering yard. Each little circle you're seeing was a round bale that was spread out by some cows and pigs eating it. And you can also see, you know, the contour plantings. So the way photogrammetry works, it's called stereoscopic parallax. So by actually taking more than one image and then overlaying them using mathematics, you can calculate topography, the elevation. And using computers and GPS technology, you can do that really quickly now, versus in World War II, they'd have to take an aerial photograph and do a lot of complicated manual calculations. So when this drone is flying overhead, it's taking lots and lots of images that are all overlapping, and effectively it's creating a point cloud. So it's documenting where the soil surface is in 3D space. So lots of points with XYZ coordinates, right? Here's, you know, a few points. Here's a whole bunch of them triangulated. The thing is, when you use drones, you can take millions of points and create a point cloud that is really accurate. And then through that point cloud, you can create a 3D surface. And then from that 3D surface, you can extrapolate a topographic map. You know, you can know your elevations. And accuracy does matter. You know, if you're only taking so many points with a low quality drone or, you know, a general poor job, you're getting these kind of triangulated polygonal mapping. And you know what? Hills don't look like triangles. This is not Mario Brothers. If you want to do good work in agroforestry, you need good accuracy. So you need a professional survey to do that. You need to have a nice fluid surface. Accuracy matters. So back to UAV. We use them for both high-end, you know, multi-year design, but also tracking progress over time, looking at tree growth. You know, if we had a big flood a few months ago, we had to look at that. You know, how bad was the damage? Where, you know, is there a tree down we can't see? What's going on here? And we can send the drone up to check that out and assess the situation, you know, up to the moment. We demonstrate them at coursework. We do at VersaLand. Here's an aerial photo from the hexacopter showing low on the slope of my farm, looking up, and you see those, you know, parallel curvilinear rows of trees and shrubs up the hill. It's pretty cool to see that with a drone. And you can also use different cameras on it. So infrared cameras are easy to stick on a drone, and you get a whole other level and layer of data that you can access from a UAV. Again, we did all this stuff using CAD technology. Another thing that I do anymore is CAD modeling for ponds and earthworks. So you can actually, if you first have the baseline data of a good quality, you know, GPS topographic survey, you can then model future earthworks on that using CAD technology. So like civil engineering software, mining software is what we use. I can actually design the dam wall for a potential pond and know ahead of time perfect cut and fill volume. So I know accurately how much soil needs to be moved to build that dam wall. And you can try out different scenarios. If we move the dam wall 3 feet up the slope, how does that change our cut fill? Well, it could drastically, and that could really impact total cost. You might be able to save 4,000 cubic yards of soil to build a dam wall, and at $2 a cubic yard or $2.50 a cubic yard, you just saved $8,000 to $10,000 on the construction cost by modeling that ahead of time. And that might cost $500 or $1,000 or $1,500 to model all of that ahead of time, or model multiple scenarios ahead of time. And that's fine, because you're gonna save $8,000, $10,000, $20,000, $15,000 when it comes to building that, because you're able to pre-bid it. You know what the actual volumes are, and no excavation contractor is gonna need to pad their bid for information they don't have, they don't know. And again, not every excavation contractor has the ability to do this stuff, but if you deliver that to them ahead of time, if you do the legwork for them, that's going to save you a lot of money over the long term, a lot. Furthermore, some excavators, and more today, do have equipment with machine control on it. And machine control on a bulldozer is just like auto steer on an agricultural tractor. It tells the machine where to go. It automatically tells the machine when to drop the blade, when to tilt it, when to angle it. So there's way less fuel costs involved, because there's no operator error with overlap. You're not traveling any more than you have to, and your overlaps are perfect. So most operators with excavation equipment that has machine control, their fuel bill is reduced by about 40%. So they're able to bid jobs more competitively, lower bids, which means you get more work done for less money. And the only way you can do that is if you can provide these files to these operators. And if you contract that out to someone like myself who can generate this stuff, you're going to save a lot of money for your project overall. So that's a lot of things I've done too. Here's an early stage photo. This was the spring of 2014, I think. At my site, we just planted some smaller trees on this slope here. We're grazing pigs in the alleyways, high leguminous forage, lots of red clover, lots of alfalfa, really succulent, cold season grasses. So we're raising pigs on pasture. I feed no grain whatsoever. They take a little over a year to finish on pure forage versus, a heavy grain diet, but it costs me basically nothing to feed them. So I can finish a pig in half the time that I could in the conventional beef. And I'm still doing it on 100% pasture, and I'm proving that it can be done. Now, I haven't met a single person in Iowa, anyway, in my state, that thinks I'm not full of shit, that thinks a pig can't live, and they think it has to live in a building, and it has to be housed on concrete, and it has to be heated and air conditioned, and it has to have 100% grain diet or 100% grain and soybean diet to survive. And you know what? A lot of livestock, in fact, all livestock came from wild species, right? They've all been domesticated, and they all lived outside without any human intervention. So in an agroforestry sense, or in a permaculture sense, if you're raising livestock using grain inputs, in my opinion, it might make more sense economically in the short term, but long-term ecologically and resilient-wise, you need to be able to raise animals on pure pasture. And that's what I'm really focusing on as far as breed selection and breeding and management. It's got to exist in a true ecosystem. It doesn't need a grain truck to survive. Here's that same site after alleyway hay mowing. So I contract out haymaking. So what I'll do is I'll mow near any sensitive areas, trees, fences, that kind of thing, with a regular bush hog. I've got a 5-foot and a 7-foot bush hog. And then when it comes to mowing big acres, I just contract out someone with a 14-foot mower conditioner to come in and mow the alleyway. So I'm not worried about them mowing over stuff, but I'm getting a lot more work done a lot faster than I can do on a 60 horsepower compact utility tractor. Here's that same site with a little bit more mulch on it. We already saw that one. There's a close-up on that tree planter I used to establish stuff. And here's a little video moving pigs around. So I use portadome pig huts. So all mobile infrastructure, don't have a single dwelling on the farm. There's no house, there's no barn, there's no foundation, there's no nothing. It's all portable infrastructure. You know, I live in a double wide trailer. I've got a high tunnel and a bunch of free pickup toppers and used polydome calf huts I use for pig shelters. All the fencing is photovoltaic. It's all portable. I like pig quick fence and high tensile perimeter wire. You know, everything is movable. Here we are planting some trees. Again, those are bare root trees. So if I can recommend to anyone, again, get your hands on a tree planter like this, because you can plant, you know, a few hundred trees a day by hand, but you can plant 6,000 trees a day with a couple people with the proper gear. And the right gear, I mean, you can build this in a welding shop using scrap material if you have to. So get yourself a tree planter. And then real quickly, I talk about livestock. So again, I'm using adapted livestock, that is animals that want to live outside, that are okay, you know, living in the weather and in the elements, that aren't gonna wuss out, get sunburned. Again, my pigs eat giant ragweed. In conventional row crop land in Iowa, ragweed it incites fear amongst corn and soy producers. But the reality is it grows incredibly quickly. It has a really great nutrient profile. So its protein content is as good as alfalfa or better. You know, just like mulberry, it's a really underappreciated forage. And my pigs will seek out giant ragweed as forage ahead of red clover, ahead of alfalfa, ahead of grasses. It's like their favorite food to eat. So that's pretty cool that nature is providing for livestock in the wild. And in the past, when I had smaller pigs and I had no, you know, boss pigs around to kind of protect the herd, I had a livestock guardian dog living with them. So Freya would take care of the coyotes. You know, one dog living with livestock, it really eliminates an incredible amount of human management. I'm not sleeping out there every night with a 308, you know, picking off coyotes. The dog can just take care of it. And again, those in the South know feral pigs, you know, they survive and thrive without a grain truck or human intervention. So I'm trying to find livestock that kind of fit the gap between completely feral and a little more domestic, meaning a little bit better meat quality, a little bit better frame yield. You know, I want to get the best of both worlds. And I'm not ringing my pigs at all. Ringing is common for pastured pigs. If you're moving them often enough, you don't have to ring them at all. And it's really a management thing. And it's breed specific too. I have a Kuni Ossabaw crosses, so they have a little bit shorter snouts with the Kuni genetics, and they're less inclined to want to root and dig for root mass. And you know, they're also less inclined to do that because I have really high quality forage. So I've planted more legumes so that they get the food they need without really being in a plot too long, being in a paddock too long, and then starting to root for the caloric needs they need because you're not providing them to them via management. Another critical takeaway is appropriate density. So I raise about 130 laying hens on 145 acres. They have free reign of the farm. I could support a lot more birds than that, but I don't manage them whatsoever. You know, I'm getting eggs out of them. I haven't bought corn in years, no chicken feed in years, but you still get eggs. So if you're running chicken tractors, you know, if you're running 50 Cornish cross broilers and a chicken tractor, they have 25 square feet to roam, you know, maybe they're getting some grass and they're getting a few insects, but because they're in such a tight area, you have to give them supplementary feed. So I would rather have animals that take longer to finish, that have a longer area to graze in an extensive format without having the economic inputs of purchased feed or the energy inputs of purchased feed. So my 2 cents. And again, multi-species livestock, raised on pasture extensively, no supplementary feed. And you know what? I also experiment with electric tractors, that kind of thing, farm hacking stuff. I really want to invite more people to become involved with farmhack.org. I have learned so much from the people that I've met through that website, and I've become a better fabricator. I've learned more. We need more people on that site. It's so excellent, and the community is so great. If you can sign up for farmhack.org, do it today, please. Aerial imagery. This is another drone shot of my place in the spring. We try and do a drone flight about 4 times a year to document the seasons. Goslings, again, another great species for raising without purchased inputs. I mean, we need more diversity in the foods that we eat. Anyway, that's all I've got. This is me. If you want to get in touch, that's every channel to get in touch with me. And I really invite everybody to reach out. If I can help you in any way, I will do so. If you aren't following VersaLand on Facebook already, please do so. I love to interact, love to learn stuff. If you click on the hashtag VersaLand, you hear people from workshops that have been there, what they've shared, what they're working on, what I'm up to. Cool hashtag to share with. And with that, I'm open up for questions.